Chapter 5 The Vanishing Humanity. The USS Reliant never docked at Norfolk. With most of its crew now showing signs of transformation, the ship anchored offshore while Sandy and the few remaining unaffected team members took a small boat to land. What greeted them was apocalyptic. The naval station had become a battleground between military personnel fighting to maintain control and transformed marine creatures advancing from the ocean. Gunfire echoed across the water, punctuated by strange, inhuman cries.
We need to reach Washington.
Sandy insisted.
If there's any chance of stopping this, we need the resources of the government.
Their journey inland proved harrowing. The roads were clogged with abandoned vehicles and desperate civilians fleeing westward, away from the advancing transformation zone. Occasionally, they encountered transformed marine life. Crabs, the size of dogs scuttling across highways. Fish-like creatures using newly evolved limbs to pursue fleeing humans. When they finally reached Washington 3 days later, they found a city under siege. The White House and Pentagon remained protected by military cordons, but much of the city had fallen into chaos. The steam-powered electrical grid still functioned in government areas, maintaining a fragile bubble of human civilization. Sandy's team was escorted immediately to the AERT headquarters in the Pentagon basement. There, they found President Trumsky and his remaining advisors, a much smaller group than before, awaiting their report.
Tell me you found something we can fight.
The president asked, his face haggard from sleepless nights. Sandy presented their findings, including footage of the massive entity beneath the Atlantic.
It's not a weapon or an attack in the conventional sense.
She explained.
It's a terraforming operation on a planetary scale.
Terraforming for whom?
Asked General Hayes.
For them,
Sandy replied, displaying images of the transformed marine creatures.
the ocean covers over 70% of our planet, yet terrestrial species, particularly humans, have dominated Earth's ecosystem. What we're witnessing is a reversal of that dynamic.
You're suggesting it's natural?
The president asked incredulously.
No, sir. The entity we discovered appears engineered, possibly by an intelligence we can't comprehend. But its purpose seems clear: to transform Earth's ecosystem to favor marine life, adaptable to land, while converting terrestrial species to aquatic forms.
How do we stop it?
Responded the president. Sandy hesitated.
I don't believe we can, sir. The microorganisms have spread throughout the global water system. They're in the rain, in our drinking water, in the moisture in the air we breathe. They're in the soil, in minerals, in metals. Based on my calculations, they've been spreading slowly for decades, perhaps centuries, establishing a baseline presence before this recent acceleration.
There must be something.
Insisted Dr. Chen.
A counter-agent. A way to target the microorganisms.
We've tried.
Sandy replied.
They adapt faster than we can develop countermeasures. And they're not just in our environment. They're already inside most of us, gradually rewriting our DNA.
The silence that followed was profound. The AERT members exchanged grim looks as the implications sank in.
So, we're looking at the end of humanity.
The president finally said, his voice unnaturally calm.
Not the end.
Sandy corrected.
A transformation. Those who adapt will survive, just not as the terrestrial species we've been.
As if to punctuate her assessment, alarms began to sound throughout the Pentagon. Reports flooded in of massive marine creatures emerging from the Potomac River. Creatures never before seen, with bodies adapted for land movement. Simultaneously, the first major systems failure occurred in the Pentagon itself. The steam-powered generators sputtered and died, as microorganisms, having evolved to affect even mechanical systems, infiltrated the machinery,
They've breached the perimeter.
reported a military officer rushing into the room.
We need to evacuate immediately.
In the chaos that followed, Sandy became separated from the AERT members. She found herself in the Pentagon courtyard, witnessing the collapse of the final bastion of human resistance. Military personnel fired desperately at advancing creatures, some resembling giant crustaceans, others like fish evolved with powerful limbs. But for every creature that fell, dozens more emerged from the river. And many of the defenders themselves began collapsing, their transformations reaching critical stages that made breathing air impossible. Sandy fled the Pentagon, making her way through streets filled with scenes of surreal horror. Transformed marine creatures hunted humans who had not yet changed, while partially transformed humans struggled with their changing bodies, some desperately seeking water to relieve their failing terrestrial respiratory systems. At the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, Sandy witnessed a grotesque tableau. Dozens of partially transformed humans submerged in the shallow water, their bodies contorted as they adapted to their new aquatic nature. Among them were government officials she recognized, military leaders, ordinary citizens, all united in their involuntary metamorphosis. As night fell, Sandy found herself alone on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, watching as Washington, D.C., the heart of human governmental power, fell to creatures emerging from the depths. The White House burned in the distance, a final act of defiance before surrender. Sandy felt the familiar tightness in her chest that signaled her own transformation had begun. She had perhaps days before her lungs would fail, and she would be forced to seek the water. The knowledge she carried, the truth about the entity beneath the Atlantic, would soon be meaningless in a world no longer dominated by human concerns. As dawn broke over the transformed landscape, Sandy made her way to the Potomac River. The water called to her changing body, promising relief from the increasingly painful process of breathing air. Along the riverbank, she saw others like her, humans in various stages of transformation, their eyes reflecting a mixture of terror and strange acceptance. The surface of the river teemed with transformed humans, their bodies now more adapted to water than land. Some retained recognizable human features. Others had changed more dramatically, with gill-like structures and webbed appendages. On the shore behind her, strange new creatures continued to emerge from the water, the vanguard of a new terrestrial ecosystem dominated by species with marine origins. They moved with increasing confidence, claiming the land that humans were being forced to abandon. Sandy waded into the Potomac, feeling immediate relief as the water covered her transforming body. Her final human thought, before surrendering to the change that would carry her species into an uncertain aquatic future, was simple. Earth had hosted many dominant species throughout its long history. Perhaps humanity's reign had simply come to its natural conclusion. The great reversal had begun. The land would belong to the creatures of the sea, while humans would return to the ocean from which their distant evolutionary ancestors had once emerged. And beneath the Atlantic, the massive entity continued its work, transforming a planet according to a design beyond human comprehension. Epilogue. 3 months after the Atlantic event, the transformation was complete. The coastal regions of every continent had been abandoned by untransformed humans, who retreated to shrinking inland territories. The former centers of human civilization, New York, London, Rio de Janeiro, Lagos, had become habitats for the new terrestrial species evolved from marine origins. In the oceans, transformed humans established new communities, developing methods of communication and survival suited to their aquatic forms. Some retained enough of their human intelligence and memory to create a bridge between their former existence and their new reality. Deep beneath the Atlantic, the entity continued its silent work, maintaining the new balance it had engineered. Whether it was a visitor from beyond Earth or an ancient presence that had always existed in the planet's depths remained unknown. What was clear, however, was that the dominance of humans over Earth had ended. A new era had begun, one in which the creatures of the sea would write the next chapter of the planet's long story. And somewhere in the depths of the Potomac River, Sandy Reeves, no longer recognizably human, but still carrying the memories of her former self, observed the New World Order with the curiosity that had defined her human existence. In her transformed consciousness, one question remained. Had this been a hostile takeover of Earth, or simply the planet's method of restoring a balance long disturbed by human supremacy? The answer, like Sandy herself, drifted somewhere between the world humanity had built and the ocean to which they had returned. The end.